Detroit, Michigan, winter of 2023. The bone-chilling cold swept through the dusty streets of the southeast side. Old buildings stood crammed together among vacant lots, where children played amidst piles of trash and the blaring horns of cars. On the corner of 12th Street, a petite girl with shiny black skin walked slowly in her tattered shoes, her skinny arms tightly clutching something wrapped in a worn-out piece of cloth. This was Maya Jackson, 14 years old, her big round eyes shining like two stars in the dark gloom of this run-down neighborhood. What she held in her hands wasn't a toy or school books, but an old violin. Its wood faded, strings loose, patched up with bits of worn-out tape that her father, Henry Jackson, had carefully applied to keep it from falling apart. Maya couldn't quite remember when she first started dreaming about the violin. Maybe it was the day she turned 5, sitting curled up in the tiny corner of the run-down apartment kitchen, listening to the sweet strains of the violin coming from her dad's old radio. Henry, a tall but quiet man, would often sit there after his shift as a janitor, turning on the radio to escape the weariness of life. "Listen here, Maya," he would say, his warm voice wrapping around her. "Music can take you far, farther than these streets." At that time, Maya didn't understand what he meant, but those melodies seeped into her heart, planting a tiny seed of a dream that even she didn't dare to name. But Detroit isn't a place for dreams. This southeast area is a territory of poverty, of indifferent gazes and screams in the dead of night. The Jackson family lives in a cramped one-bedroom apartment with peeling walls and the smell of mildew seeping into every breath. Henry works as a janitor at Franklin High School, 3 miles from home, earning just enough to buy bread and pay the rent. Maya's mother left when she was just a baby, leaving Henry to raise their child alone. He never complains, but Maya sees in her father's callous hands, in the way he quietly sits mending her worn-out shoes under the dim light. She tells herself that one day she will make her father proud, that she will pull him out of this endless cycle with her own little hands. The violin that Maya holds today isn't a gift from someone wealthy. It's something Henry found in a pile of discarded items at Franklin School 2 years ago, a broken instrument tossed away in a storage room, with cracked wood and nearly all the strings snapped. "I can fix it," Henry said with gentle smile, then spent hours at night gluing each shattered piece back together with tape and glue, even though he knew nothing about musical instruments. When he handed it to Maya, his eyes lit up as if he were giving his daughter the whole world. "Play it, Maya. Make it sing," he urged. And Maya did. She taught herself through free video clips on the old, beat-up phone that Henry bought from a pawn shop for $20. No teacher, no books, just her and the violin, in the small room filled with the sound of the wind whistling through the broken window. Every afternoon, after school at Franklin, Maya didn't run off to play like the other kids. She stayed behind, quietly followed her dad to the long hallways, helping him wipe down tables and sweep the floors. But when Henry got busy in the cafeteria, Maya would sneak into the music room, a place she never dared enter when anyone else was around. In the dim light of the fluorescent bulbs, she would sit in the corner, resting the violin on her shoulder, drawing out the first notes. The sound that emerged wasn't smooth. It was rough and shaky, like the cry of a bird with a broken wing. But for Maya, it was her voice, her way of telling the world about the dreams that no one believed she could reach. Franklin School isn't a place for a girl like Maya. Located on the northern edge of Detroit, this school is a source of pride for middle-class and wealthy families, where students wear crisp uniforms, sport shiny shoes, and always have expensive extracurricular activities. Maya is the exception, a dark spot in a sea of white. Her uniform is hand-me-downs Henry got from the school's charity, and her shoes are so worn that her toes peek out. Every time she walks through the towering iron gates of Franklin, she feels smaller than ever, as if she's a stain that everyone wants to erase. But in Maya's heart, the dream of the violin never faded. She imagined herself standing on a grand stage, under dazzling lights, playing the melodies her father used to listen to on the radio. She dreamed of Juilliard, a name she had stumbled upon in an old newspaper in the teacher's lounge, a distant place in New York where musical geniuses gathered. One day, she whispered to her violin on those frigid nights, "I'll get there." But even as she said it, she knew how far-fetched that dream really was. For a poor girl in Detroit, Even buying a new violin felt like an impossible dream, let alone escaping this run-down neighborhood. Today, as Maya walked down 12th Street, she paused in front of an old music store. Through the cloudy glass, she spotted a violin hanging on a polished wooden wall, its strings gleaming. The price tag read $300, an amount her family would have to save up for an entire year to afford. Maya tightened her grip on the instrument in her hands, feeling the rough wood against her small palm. "It's okay," she told herself. I don't need something new. I just need it to sing." But deep down, a small sadness crept in, the sorrow of a girl who knew that her dream might always remain just that, a dream. Maya Jackson walked into Franklin High School on a winter morning, the chill from Detroit seeping through the thin coat that Henry had bought from the thrift store for $5. The school hallways stretched endlessly, the sound of polished leather shoes from the wealthy students echoing steadily, mixed with their carefree laughter. Maya kept her head down, her tightly braided hair falling in front of her face, trying to make herself small so no one would notice her. But she knew it was pointless. In her hands was an old violin, wrapped in the worn cloth she always carried, like a talisman, or, more accurately, a scar she couldn't hide. The students at Franklin never let Maya be. Every time she walked by, curious glances quickly turned into disdainful sneers. "Look, it's the janitor's kid bringing that broken violin again." A voice rang out from a group of students huddled near the lockers. Maya recognized that voice. It was Charlotte Hayes, the blonde girl with icy blue eyes, daughter of a famous lawyer in Detroit. Charlotte always wore a pristine uniform, her white shoes spotless, and she was always surrounded by a gaggle of friends who giggled at every word she said. "She probably thinks she's some kind of artist or something," Charlotte continued, her tone sweet but laced with sharpness. "But come on, that violin could only play on a street corner, right?" Her friends burst into laughter, the sound echoing through the hallway like daggers piercing Maya's heart. The girl tightened her grip on guitar and quickened her steps, but inside her, a wave of emotions was rising. She wanted to scream, to turn back and tell Charlotte that she was wrong, that this guitar was not just a pile of wood, but her entire world. But Maya didn't do that. She had never done that. She just lowered her head even more, swallowed hard against the tears that threatened to spill, and kept walking. She had long gotten used to the mocking words since she started at Franklin 3 years ago, thanks to a scholarship for the children of school staff. But being used to it didn't mean it didn't hurt. Every word from Charlotte, every sneer from a group of friends, felt like stones thrown at her fragile dreams. The classroom at the end of the hallway is where Maya finds a bit of peace. It's the after-school class where she often sits alone after helping her dad clean up. Today, when the school bell rang, Maya waited for the hallway to clear before quietly stepping into the music room. The spacious room filled with the scent of polished wood from the piano in the center, and the light streaming in from the tall windows cast a soft golden glow on the floor. Maya placed her violin on the table, carefully opened a protective cloth, and gazed at it. In the light, the cracks on the body of the instrument stood out more than ever, and the faded pieces of tape looked pretty shabby. But to Maya, it was beautiful, in a way that no one at Franklin could ever understand. She sat down, rested the violin on her shoulder, and began to draw the bow. The first notes rang out, shaky and uneven, like the breath of someone who had just run a mile. But then, as she closed her eyes, the sound began to smooth out. She played a short piece from Canon in D that she had watched over and over on her father's old phone. The violin's sweet tones filled the empty room, like a whisper telling the story of the days she huddled in the cold apartment, dreaming of a grand stage. In that moment, Maya was no longer the poor girl from southeast Detroit. She was an artist, and this worn-out violin was her voice, a voice she believed would one day resonate far and wide. But that dream was quickly interrupted. The door swung open, and Maya jumped, turning around. Henry stood there, his gray janitor uniform dusted with grime, the broom in his hand gently resting on the floor. "Maya, are you still here?" His voice was gentle, but tinged with worry. He stepped inside, his rubber boots creaking on the wooden floor, and sat down beside her. "I thought you'd gone home, since you weren't helping out in the cafeteria." Maya lowered her head, her fingers gliding over the strings. "I just wanted to practice a little, Dad." she said softly, her voice choked. Henry looked at her, his gaze softening. He placed his large, callous hand on her shoulder. You play beautifully, Maya. I heard you from outside the door. But you need to be careful with those kids. They won't go easy on you. Maya nodded, but inside her, a small fire was burning. She knew her dad was right. Charlotte and her friends would never leave her alone, would never believe that a girl like her could do anything with this violin. But that very thought made her want to try even harder. Dad. She looked up, her eyes shining brightly. I want to play the violin really well. I want to prove that I can do it, no matter who I am or where I come from. Henry smiled, a rare smile that lit up his weathered face. I believe in you, Maya. I've always believed in you. As the father and son left the music room, darkness enveloped Franklin. Maya clutched her violin, following Henry down the now empty hallway. The cold wind from Detroit slipped through the cracks of the door, bringing with it a bone-chilling chill. But inside Maya, a warm feeling was growing, a feeling of hope, of determination. She didn't know that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, that her dream of playing the violin would face obstacles greater than Charlotte's mocking words. But right now, under her father's trusting gaze, Maya felt she could accomplish anything. Winter in Detroit is becoming increasingly harsh, with cold winds from Lake St. Clair sweeping through the southeast, bringing a bone-chilling chill. But for Maya Jackson, the cold outside is nothing compared to the chill she feels every day at Franklin High School. The long hallways of this prestigious school, with their glossy blue lockers and bright fluorescent lights, are where Maya must walk like a tiny warrior, clutching her old violin in hand, facing sharp glares and words more cutting than ice. It was a Tuesday morning, and the atmosphere in the school was more lively than usual because of the upcoming music theory test. Maya walked into the classroom, her worn-out shoes squeaking on the tile floor as she tried to find a corner to sit in. But before she could set her frayed backpack down, a bright voice rang out from the back of the room. "Oh my gosh! Look who it is! The violinist has arrived!" Charlotte Hayes giggled, her golden hair shimmering under the lights, her blue eyes sparkling with mischief. Surrounding her were a group of rich kids from North Detroit, who immediately turned to look at Maya, smirking. "Are you planning to bring that piece of junk on stage, Maya? Or are you going to have your dad clean the stage first?" Charlotte continued, her tone sweet but laced with venom. Maya stood frozen, her hands gripping the straps of her backpack, feeling as if the floor beneath her was shaking. She had heard these words 100 times from Charlotte, from her group of friends, even from the silent glances of those too afraid to speak up. But today, something felt different. Charlotte's taunts weren't just idle words. They pierced her heart like an arrow, reminding her of her father, Henry Jackson, hunched over mopping the floor in his drab janitor uniform. "Don't mention my dad," Maya whispered, her voice so soft she wasn't even sure she had said out loud. But Charlotte heard. She raised an eyebrow, stepping closer, her pristine white shoes clicking sharply against the floor. "What's wrong? Upset? Well, it's true. Your dad is just a janitor, and you dream of being an artist? Don't kid yourself, Maya. Know your place." The whole class burst into laughter, the sound echoing like waves crashing against the shore, sweeping away the last bit of confidence left in Maya's heart. She lowered her head, her tightly braided hair hiding her reddening eyes. She wanted to run away, to dash out of the classroom, but her feet felt like they were glued to the floor. And then, as if things couldn't get any worse, the classroom door swung open. Eleanor Price, the music teacher, strode in with her usual haughty demeanor. She wore an expensive sweater, her hair pulled up high, and her sharp eyes scanned the classroom. "What's all this noise about?" she asked, her voice as dry as dust. Charlotte immediately sat down, flashing her angelic smile. "Oh, it's nothing, ma'am. We were just talking about the test," she replied, her tone as sweet as sugar. But Eleanor's gaze landed on Maya. She looked at the girl, then at the old violin she held in her hands, a smirk briefly flickering across her lips. "Maya Jackson, it's you again," she said, her tone flat yet full of meaning. "I've heard you really like to mess around with that instrument after school. What do you plan to do with it? Play in the school orchestra?" The whole class laughed again, this time louder, as if Eleanor's words were a signal for them to mock freely. Maya looked up, trying to muster all her courage. I just want to give it a try, she said, her voice trembling. Eleanor crossed her arms, her gaze icy. Get a try? With that thing? Maya, I'm afraid we don't have room here for cheap toys. The Franklin Orchestra is for serious students, not for playing around. Eleanor's words hit Maya like a punch to the gut. She felt her breath catch, as if the air in the room had suddenly been sucked away. The teacher didn't just reject her. She turned Maya's dream into a joke in front of the whole class. Charlotte and her friends snickered. Some even pretended to cough to cover their laughter. Maya hung her head, gripping her instrument so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She wanted to scream that the teacher was wrong, that she wasn't playing around, that she had practiced for hours in the corner of the music room, under the dim light, just to one day stand on that stage. But she couldn't say anything. She just stood there, small and powerless, while the laughter of her classmates echoed around her. That day in class felt like a nightmare. When the final bell rang, Maya hurried out of the classroom, sprinting straight to the back hallway by the cafeteria. She crouched down in a corner, clutching her guitar, tears silently streaming down the worn fabric of its cover. I don't belong here, she whispered to herself, her voice choked with emotion. I never belonged here. But then, through her tears, she heard the familiar sound of footsteps. Henry appeared, broom in hand, his janitor uniform dusty and stained. He didn't say a word. He just quietly sat down beside her, his large hand resting on her shoulder. Are they teasing you? Henry asked, his voice warm and deep. Maya nodded, too afraid to look up. They say I don't deserve it, Dad, that I'm just a poor girl, and that this guitar is just trash. Henry sighed, his hand gently squeezing her shoulder. Maya, listen to me, he said, his tone firm. They can say whatever they want, but they don't get to decide who you are. You have something they'll never have, a heart that dreams and hands that strive. Don't let them take that away from you. He pointed to the guitar in her hands. That guitar isn't trash. It's your voice. Make it sing, and one day the whole world will have to listen. Maya looked up, gazing into her father's eyes filled with love and trust. In that moment, the pain from Charlotte's taunts and Eleanor's coldness seemed to fade away. She wiped her tears, hugged her guitar tightly, and stood up. I won't give up, Dad, she said, her voice soft but resolute. Henry smiled, the gentle smile brightening his weathered face. I know, Maya. I've always known. As father and daughter stepped out of the hallway, the fiery sunset streamed to the tall windows of Franklin, casting a warm glow on the old guitar. Maya had no idea that the teasing she faced today was just the beginning, that the road ahead would be even harsher. But in this moment, with her father's love by her side, she felt a small flame igniting in her heart. The flame of hope, of resilience, ready to face anything to protect her dreams. Spring 2024 swept into Detroit, bringing with it warm breezes that flowed through the southeast side, gradually melting away the biting chill of winter. But at Franklin High School, that fresh air couldn't chase away the tension that hung in the air. The annual talent show, the biggest event of the year, was just days away. The hallways buzzed with laughter and chatter. The sounds of instruments echoed from practice rooms, and colorful posters adorned every wall. For most students, this was a chance to showcase their talents and bask in applause. But for Maya Jackson, a 14-year-old girl clutching her worn-out violin, it was a doorway leading to both hope and fear. Maya didn't plan to participate in the performance. After months of enduring the mockery of Charlotte Hayes and the cold stares from Eleanor Price, she had learned to keep her dreams hidden, quietly practicing in the music room after school when no one was around. But last week, while helping her father, Henry Jackson, clean up the cafeteria, a piece of paper fell out from a stack of documents on the teacher's desk. It was an announcement about the performance, with the bold letters reading, "All students are encouraged to participate." Maya picked up the paper, her fingers trembling as they traced over each word. "You should give it a try, Maya," Henry said when he saw her hesitate, his voice warm as always. "I know how well you play. Don't keep it hidden forever." Her father's trusting gaze made Maya's heart flutter, and despite her fear, She nodded, but fate seemed determined not to make things easy. That morning, when Maya walked into the teacher's lounge to submit her application, she heard Eleanor Price's voice coming from behind the slightly ajar door. "This year's performance has to be absolutely perfect," she said to another teacher, her tone sharp as a knife. "I don't want anything ruining it, especially not any silly amateur acts." Maya froze, her hand gripping the application tightly, feeling as if the floor beneath her was crumbling away. She knew she was the one Eleanor was talking about. But then she took a deep breath and pushed the door open. "Miss Price," Maya said, her voice small but clear, "I'd like to sign up to perform on the violin." Eleanor turned around, her eyes narrowing, a smirk briefly crossing her face. "Violin? You Maya? All right, go ahead and submit it. But don't expect me to have high hopes." On the day of the performance, the large auditorium at Franklin was packed with people. The rows of bright red seats glowed under stage lights, and the murmurs of students, parents, and teachers blended into a chaotic symphony. Maya stood in the corner of the auditorium, clutching her old violin, her worn shoes scuffing against the polished wooden floor. She wore a faded sweater that Henry had washed for her, but it still couldn't hide the stark contrast between her and the wealthy students in their glamorous outfits. Charlotte Hayes, standing a few steps away, brushed past her with a disdainful look. "Are you really planning to go on stage with that?" Charlotte scoffed, pointing at Maya's instrument. "Good luck, artist. Don't end up being the laughingstock of the whole school." Charlotte's friends giggled along, and Maya felt her heart tighten. But she didn't respond. She just gripped her violin tighter, trying to keep her hands from trembling. As the show began, the auditorium buzzed with impressive performances. A skilled piano piece, an energetic dance, a song that had the whole school clapping loudly. Maya sat in the back row, watching each person step onto stage, her heart feeling like it was being squeezed by fear. "I don't belong here," she whispered to herself, her fingers running over the pieces of tape on the piano. But then she spotted her dad, Henry, standing at the back of the auditorium, still in his janitor uniform, a broom propped against the wall. He didn't say a word, just looked at her with gentle gaze, as if to say, "You can do this, Maya." And that look pulled her back from the depths of self-doubt. Then that moment arrived. Eleanor Price stepped onto the stage, the microphone sparkling in her hand. "Next," she said, her voice steady but laced with something hard to pinpoint, "we have a special performance from a student, someone you might not expect. Maya Jackson, please come up to stage." Her name echoed to the speakers, and the entire auditorium suddenly fell silent, then erupted into whispers. Maya felt every gaze fixated on her, like needles pricking her skin. She stood up, her legs trembling, taking one shaky step after another toward the stage. The blinding light shone directly in her face, making it nearly impossible to see anything but the hazy outlines of the audience below. Charlotte and her friends sat in the front row, smirks on their faces, whispering among themselves. "Look at that. The janitor's kid is coming up on stage." One of them said, loud enough for Maya to hear. When Maya Jackson stepped onto the stage at Franklin High School, she faced not only the blinding lights, but also the skeptical and mocking gazes of the audience. Yet, in that moment, she transformed her old violin into a voice of perseverance and dreams. Do you want to cheer on this inspiring girl's journey? Comment Go Maya below to support Maya Jackson. Let's empower Maya together, so she knows she's not alone on her quest to achieve her dreams. Your comment will be a tremendous source of encouragement. Maya stood in the middle of the stage, tiny under bright lights, the old violin in her hands, looking pitiful against the lavish backdrop of Franklin. She looked down and saw Eleanor standing in the wings, arms crossed, her gaze icy as if waiting for Maya to fail. "Play, Maya," she said, her voice soft yet laced with meaning. "Show us what you've got." Maya took a deep breath, her heart pounding like it might burst. She knew this wasn't a real opportunity. Eleanor had called her up to make a fool of her, to prove that a poor girl like her didn't belong here. But then she glanced over to the wings and saw Henry still standing there, his eyes shining with belief. And in that moment, a small flame ignited in her heart. The stage lights of the Franklin Auditorium shone directly on Maya Jackson, making her feel like she was standing in the middle of a blazing desert with no way out. Her small hands trembled as she lifted the old violin to her shoulder, the bits of tape on the body of the instrument glimmering weakly in the light. Below her, hundreds of eyes were fixed on her, curious, disdainful, and some even waiting for her to fail. Charlotte Hayes sat in the front row, her legs crossed, a smirk on her face, as if she was ready to watch a comedy unfold. "Go ahead, artist," Charlotte whispered to her friends, loud enough for their giggles to ripple through the auditorium like a small wave. Maya closed her eyes, trying to push away the whispers surrounding her. The laughter of Charlotte, the cold voice of Eleanor Price, all felt like tiny daggers stabbing at her fragile confidence. She wanted to turn back, to run off the stage, to return to the familiar corner of the music room where no one judged her. But then, through the slits of her eyelids, she saw Henry Jackson, her father, still standing quietly at the back of the auditorium. His drab janitor's uniform stood out in the crowd, but his gaze shone like a lighthouse in the dark sea. He gave a slight nod as if to say, "You can do it, Maya." And that nod pulled her back from the abyss of fear. She placed a bow on the strings, took a deep breath, and began to draw. The first note rang out, trembling and hoarse, like the wind sweeping through southeast Detroit on a frigid winter night. The audience was still whispering, a few soft laughs drifting into her ears. But Maya didn't stop. She squeezed her eyes shut tighter, letting her heart guide her hands. The next notes flowed out smoother, stronger, like a small river gradually breaking through the thick ice. She played Canon in D, the piece she had practiced hundreds of times on her father's old phone, the music she had once dreamed would echo on a grand stage. The sound from the worn-out violin was far from perfect. It was rough and occasionally offbeat, but it carried a strange vitality, like the cry of a soul refusing to be subdued. And then the miracle happened. The whispers in the auditorium gradually faded away. The smirks on Charlotte's and her friends' faces slowly disappeared, replaced by looks of astonishment. Maya's music was not just notes. It was her story, the tale of days spent huddled in a rundown apartment, of nights practicing until her fingers bled, of the quiet love that Henry had for her. Each time the bow glided across the strings, it felt like it was tearing down the curtain of prejudice surrounding her, revealing a heart ablaze with dreams. The auditorium fell into silence, a profound, absolute silence, as if the whole world was holding its breath to listen. Eleanor Price stood backstage, her arms tightly crossed over her chest, her gaze no longer cold but filled with astonishment. She had called Maya up on stage intending to make a fool of her, to prove that a poor girl like her didn't deserve Franklin. But now, Maya's music felt like a slap in the face to her arrogance. She clenched her fists, her lips pressed together, unable to believe that the tattered instrument could produce such beautiful sound. In the front row, Charlotte sat up straight, her wide blue eyes fixed on the stage, her hands instinctively gripping the edge of her seat. She was no longer smiling. Instead, a sense of discomfort washed over her, as if she had just realized she had underestimated an opponent she once thought was harmless. As the music reached its climax, Maya opened her eyes. She no longer saw the blinding lights or the judgmental gazes. All she saw was Henry, her father, standing there, his eyes glistening with tears, a gentle smile spreading across his weathered face. She played stronger, faster, as if she wanted to convey everything she kept inside. Her gratitude, her love, and a promise that she would never give up. The sound of the violin echoed throughout the auditorium, piercing to the glossy wooden walls of Franklin, like a declaration that she, Maya Jackson, was no joke. As the final note lingered, long and deep, the auditorium fell into silence for a few seconds. Maya lowered her instrument, breathless, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked out at the audience, waiting, unsure of what would happen next. And then, from a distant corner of the room, a small, timid clap broke the stillness. It was Mr. Peterson, the elderly history teacher, who rarely smiled. His applause was like a gentle breeze, quickly spreading into a storm. The entire audience stood up, clapping thunderously, with whistles and cheers erupting all around. Maya stood there, stunned, tears silently streaming down her cheeks. She glanced over at Henry and saw him clapping too, his callous hands striking together with pride. But Eleanor Price didn't clap. She stepped onto the stage, her face set, her voice cutting through the applause over the microphone. "Thank you, Maya," she said, her tone flat but tinged with a hint of awkwardness. Surprise and performance. Everyone can take their seats." The audience slowly settled back down, but their eyes remained fixed on Maya, no longer filled with disdain, but rather with astonishment and curiosity. Maya lowered her head and walked off the stage, her legs still trembling, but her heart lighter than ever. She didn't realize that this moment was not just a small victory. It was a pivotal turning point, opening up a path she had never dared to dream of. After the talent show at Franklin High School, the atmosphere in the auditorium still buzzed with applause for Maya Jackson. The 14-year-old stepped off the stage, her legs still trembling, clutching her old violin tightly like a loyal companion. The blinding lights had dimmed, but the gazes of hundreds, ranging from surprise to admiration, remained fixed on her, as if asking, "Who is this girl daring to stand up against the line of prejudice?" But for Maya, all she could see was Henry Jackson, her father, standing quietly at the back of the auditorium, his eyes glistening with tears, a warm smile lighting up his weathered face. Maya walked down the now empty hallway, the sound of her worn shoes creaking on the glossy wooden floor of Franklin. She could no longer hear the whispers of her classmates or the cold voice of Eleanor Price. All she felt was a steady thump of her heart pounding in her chest, mixed with a strange sensation that was both relief and fear. She had done something she had never dared to dream of. She had silenced the entire auditorium, and then they applauded. But as she approached Henry, everything became clearer. It wasn't the applause of the audience, nor the astonishment of Charlotte Hayes, but the unwavering gaze of her father, his eyes filled with trust, that kept her standing strong on that stage. Henry set down the broom and stepped forward to embrace Maya. His large, callous hand gently patted her back, just like he always did whenever she cried over the teasing at school. "I'm so proud of you, Maya," he said, his voice warm yet choked with emotion. Maya looked up and saw tears streaming down her father's face. It was the first time she had ever seen him cry. "Dad," she whispered, unsure what to say. Henry smiled, wiping his tears with the sleeve of his grimy janitor uniform. "I told you you have a special heart." Today, the whole world heard it. They stepped out of Franklin, the fiery sunset of Detroit casting a warm glow over the old violin in Maya's arms. She held it tightly, feeling as if it had become an inseparable part of her. But as they walked through the southeast side, where shabby houses crowded around heaps of trash, a wave of anxiety began to creep into her heart. "Dad," she said softly, her voice wavering, "I don't know if I can do it again. Today was just luck. What if they laugh at me again?" Henry stopped, looking down at his daughter, his gaze gentle yet firm. "Maya, you don't have to prove anything to anyone," he said. "You play for yourself, for your dream. I just want to see you not give up, and that's enough." That night, in the tiny apartment of the Jackson family, Maya curled up on the old armchair, the violin resting on her lap. Outside, the spring wind whistled through the cracked window, bringing with it a gentle chill from Detroit. Henry sat across from her, an old radio playing a sweet violin melody, the kind of sound that had planted dreams in Maya's heart since she was a little girl. He looked at her, his gaze piercing through the tough years they had endured together. "Do you remember the day I found this violin?" Henry asked, his voice deep and warm. Maya nodded, her fingers tracing the bits of tape on the body of the instrument. "Yes, you found it in the school storage and fixed it up for me." Henry smiled softly, the smile making the wrinkles on his face stand out even more. "That's right. Back then, I didn't know if it would even work. But I thought if I could fix it, you would make it sing. And you did, Maya, not just today, but for a long time now." He stood up, retrieving a small wooden box from the corner of the cabinet, placing it down in front of her. "I've kept this since you were little," he said, opening the box. Inside was a tiny pair of shoes, worn and tattered, but carefully preserved. "These are the first shoes I bought for you, with my overtime pay from Franklin. At that time, I promised myself I would do everything to make sure you wouldn't have to grow up in poverty forever. Maya looked at the shoes, tears silently falling. She remembered the days Henry walked 3 miles from home to school just to save a few bucks on bus fare so she could buy books. She recalled the nights he sat fixing guitar under the dim light, his callous hands carefully taping every little piece. "Dad has sacrificed so much," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I don't want you to suffer anymore." Henry shook his head, placing his hand on her shoulder. "Maya, you just don't understand," he said, his voice steady. "Everything I do isn't a sacrifice. It's a joy. Seeing you play today, I know every drop of sweat I've shed was worth it." Henry's words were like a warm breeze blowing through Maya's icy heart. She looked up at her father, and for the first time since a performance, she felt a new strength rising within her. It wasn't the strength from the applause of the audience, but from the quiet love of a father who had always stood behind her, even when the whole world turned away. "I won't give up, Dad," she said, her voice soft but filled with determination. Henry nodded, his eyes shining with belief. "I knew it, Maya. I always knew." The dim light from the old table lamp in the Jackson family's small apartment cast a glow on Maya's face, highlighting her big, round eyes that now shimmered with tears. She sat there, holding her tiny childhood shoes in her hands, her heart feeling constricted by the silent sacrifices of Henry Jackson. Outside, the spring wind of Detroit whistled through the cracks of the broken window, carrying the last chill of the season. But in this room, the warmth from the father-daughter bond seemed enough to chase away the biting cold. Henry stood up, walked to the corner of the room, and turned on the old radio. The sweet, haunting notes of an unnamed violin piece filled the air, serving as a reminder of the early days when Maya's dreams were just beginning to take root. "Maya, do you know what I love most about you?" Henry asked, his voice deep yet warm as he settled into the chair across from her. Maya shook her head, her fingers still fiddling with the small shoes in her hands. "It's the way you never give up," he said, his eyes lighting up like a small flame in the dark of night. "You're like that violin over there. It may look fragile, but inside it holds a strength that no one expects." He pointed to the old violin resting on the table, the faded pieces of tape glimmering under the light. "Today, when you play on the Franklin stage, I won't just hear the music. I'll hear your heart. All those days you persevered practicing despite the teasing." Maya lowered her head, tears silently falling onto the shoes in her hands. She recalled the long nights in Franklin's music room, when she played until her fingers bled, just to prove that she wasn't a joke like Charlotte Hayes had said. She remembered the time she wanted to give up, when the laughter of her wealthy friends and Eleanor Price's cold gaze made her feel small and pitiful. "But Dad," she said, her voice choked with emotion, "I'm so scared. Today everyone is applauding, but what if tomorrow they laugh at me again? I'm not sure I'm strong enough to take it anymore." Henry leaned in, his large hand grasping hers, warm and reassuring. "Maya, you don't have to be strong all by yourself," he said, his voice like a promise. "I'm here, always here. Every time you feel like you're about to fall, remember that I walked 3 miles every day so you could get to Franklin, worked extra hours so you could have that phone to watch your music lessons. I didn't do all that for you to give up." He smiled, the creases in his face deepening, but also lighting up the whole room. "You're the reason I wake up every morning, Maya. Don't be afraid of failure. Be afraid of not trying." Henry's words coursed through Maya like a jolt of electricity. She looked up, meeting her father's gaze, and in that moment, all her fears seemed to melt away. She saw the image of her father hunched over, sweeping the floor at Franklin, his calloused hands repairing the guitar late into the night, and the way his eyes lit up when she stepped off the stage today. "You never gave up on me," she whispered, her voice trembling but full of emotion. "So I won't give up on you." Henry nodded, his eyes shimmering, not with sadness but with pride. "That's right, my girl. We're a team." Maya stood up, placed the small shoes back in a wooden box, and embraced the violin. She lifted it to her shoulder, drawing a few short notes not to practice, but to feel. The husky sound echoed in the small room, but to her, it was more beautiful than any expensive instrument in Franklin. "I will keep playing, Dad," she said, her voice more certain than ever. "Not for Charlotte, not for Miss Price, but for you and for myself." Henry clapped softly, like the only audience member in this tiny concert hall. "I look forward to the day you play on a bigger stage, Maya," he said. "And I know that day is not far off." As the radio gradually faded out, the apartment sank into silence, leaving only the steady breaths of the father and son. Maya sat down beside Henry, resting her head on his shoulder, feeling the warmth from his worn-out janitor uniform. She had no idea that today's performance was just the beginning, that greater challenges awaited her ahead. From Charlotte's jealousy, Eleanor's doubts, to the door she had never dared to dream would open. But right now, in her father's embrace, she felt she could face anything. Henry's love was not just a support. It was a flame that lit her path, the strength that helped her get through her darkest days. Outside, Detroit remained cold and noisy with the blaring horns and shouts from the southeast side. But in this small apartment, Maya Jackson had found a refuge not made of brick walls, but her father's unconditional love. She closed her eyes, letting the notes in her head resonate, and for the first time, she believed that her dream was not just a dream. It was something she could reach for, step by step, with Henry always standing behind her. After the talent show at Franklin High School, Maya Jackson's life seemed to turn a new page, even though she didn't realize it yet. The thunderous applause from the audience still echoed in her mind, but as she and Henry Jackson walked away from the school, crossing the sunset-lit 12th Street of Detroit, she still felt as small as ever. Her father's love and faith had helped her conquer her fear on stage, but deep down, Maya worried that it was all just a fleeting moment, and tomorrow Charlotte Hayes and Eleanor Price would turn her into a laughingstock again, as if performance had never happened. That night, in the rundown apartment in the southeast, Maya sat next to Henry, listening to the sweet strains of the violin from the old radio. She cradled her instrument, her fingers brushing over the faded pieces of tape, her heart a mix of joy and anxiety. "Dad," she said softly, her voice hesitant, "I don't know what's going to happen next. Everyone applauded today, but what if they forget me?" Henry looked at her, his eyes gentle yet firm. "Maya, you made them listen," he said, his voice warm. "No matter what tomorrow brings, you've proven you belong on that stage. Don't doubt yourself." His words were like a gentle breeze, soothing her troubled heart. But fate had bigger plans than Maya or Henry could ever imagine. The next morning, as Maya walked into Franklin to start what she thought would be just another ordinary school day, the atmosphere felt different. The long hallways still echoed with the sound of polished leather shoes and the chatter of wealthy students. But this time, the glances directed at her were no longer just dismissive. A few kids whispered as she passed by, while others looked at her with curiosity. "That's the girl who played the violin yesterday." A voice rang out from the crowd. Maya lowered her head, clutching her violin tightly, trying to shrink away like she always did. But she couldn't hide forever. As she walked into the music room, Eleanor Price was already there, arms crossed tightly, her sharp gaze sweeping over Maya. "Maya Jackson," she called, her voice steady but laced with something hard to decipher. "Come here for a moment." Maya froze, her heart pounding, feeling as if the floor beneath her was shaking. She immediately thought of Eleanor's past taunts, that her instrument was cheap, that she didn't belong in Franklin's orchestra. What did I do wrong this time, she wondered, stepping closer to her with trembling legs. But Eleanor didn't say anything right away. She just stared at her, then turned to a man standing in the corner of the room, someone Maya had never noticed before. He was tall, dressed in a deep blue suit, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed, with sharp yet warm eyes. He walked forward, his leather shoes echoing on the wooden floor, and when he spoke, his deep, resonant voice silenced the entire class. "I am Victor Langston," he said, looking directly at Maya. "I watched this young lady's performance yesterday, and I must say, I've never heard an old violin sing with such emotion in all my 30 years in this career." The auditorium buzzed with whispers. A few students gasped in disbelief. Maya stood frozen, unable to believe her ears. Victor Langston, the name she had heard on her dad's radio, a legendary violinist from New York, a Juilliard graduate who had played for audiences around the world. Eleanor Price raised an eyebrow, her expression a mix of confusion and intrigue. "Mr. Langston is here to scout talent for a special project," she said, her voice a bit stiff. as if she still couldn't wrap her head around what was happening. Victor nodded, stepping closer to Maya, leaning down to meet her gaze. "Maya, right?" he asked, his tone gentle yet commanding. "I was sitting in the back row yesterday, not looking for anything in particular, just passing through Detroit on my way to Chicago. But when you played, I couldn't take my eyes off you. That old violin may be worn, but your heart is anything but. You have something that Juilliard is always searching for, true talent, unbound by circumstance." Maya felt her breath catch in her throat. Juilliard, the name she had dreamed of on those freezing nights in Detroit, a place she thought was meant for wealthy geniuses, not a poor girl like her. "Sir, I don't understand," she stammered, her voice trembling. Victor smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I understand, Maya. I was once a poor kid in Harlem, with nothing but a borrowed guitar. But someone gave me a chance, and now I want to do the same for you. I will fund your journey to Juilliard, every expense, from the plane ticket 500 miles from here to New York, to your tuition. You just need to say yes." The audience fell into silence, then erupted into a more intense whisper. Charlotte Hayes, sitting in the middle row, clenched her fists, her green eyes flashing with a mix of jealousy and astonishment. Eleanor Price tightened her grip, her face hardening in disbelief at what she had just heard. And Maya, she stood there, her eyes wide open, feeling as if the whole world had just tilted beneath her feet. "But I don't know if I'm strong enough," she said softly, her voice laced with doubt. Victor looked at her, his gaze lighting up with belief. "Maya, you made this entire audience fall silent yesterday. Juilliard isn't out of reach. It's right in front of you, if you dare to take that step." Victor Langston's proposal hung in the air of Franklin High School's music class, like a high note that refused to come down. Maya Jackson stood there, small amidst the astonished gazes of her classmates, her old violin no longer a subject of mockery, but the center of attention. The light from the window streamed to the faded silver tape on the instrument, making it sparkle like uncut gems. But inside Maya, a storm of emotions was brewing. Joy mingled with fear, hope intertwined with doubt. Victor looked at her, his gaze both gentle and resolute, like a teacher who sees potential in a student. "I know what you're thinking," he said, his deep voice cutting through the whispers in the classroom. "You think Juilliard is a distant dream, that a girl from Detroit with worn-out shoes and a patched-up violin doesn't belong there. But let me tell you, Maya, I've seen hundreds of students at Juilliard. Kids from wealthy families, with great teachers and top-notch instruments, but not many have a heart like yours. Yesterday when you played, I didn't just hear technique. I heard your soul." The whole class fell silent. Even Charlotte Hayes stopped whispering to her friends, her blue eyes wide open in disbelief that Victor Langston, a music legend, was directing those words to Maya. Eleanor Price stood in the corner of the room, her arms still crossed, her face hard as stone. She wanted to say something, to object, but Victor's piercing gaze silenced her. Maya lowered her head, her fingers gripping the guitar tightly, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Mr. Langston, I'm really grateful, but I'm not sure I can do this. I've never learned music the right way. I've never had a teacher. What if I fail?" Victor stepped closer, leaning down to look her straight in the eye. "Maya, failure isn't about falling down. Failure is not having the courage to get back up," he said, his voice steady like a vow. "I'm not promising that this path will be easy. Juilliard is a battleground 500 miles from Detroit to New York, not just a distance, but a whole new world full of challenges. But I believe you can do it because I've seen you overcome things that many have given up on long ago." He paused, a gentle smile spreading across his face. "And if you're worried about money, don't be. I'll cover the plane tickets, tuition, even a new instrument if you want. I just need you to say yes." The auditorium erupted with whispers. Some students were wide-eyed, while others shot Maya envious glances. Charlotte Hayes clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms, her face flushed with anger. "How could this happen?" she whispered to the friend beside her. "She's just a poor girl." But Charlotte's voice didn't carry as it used to. It was drowned out by the pounding of Maya's heart in her chest. She looked up at Victor, then turned to the classroom door, where Henry Jackson had just entered, gently placing his broom on the floor. He had heard everything, and his eyes sparkled, not with surprise, but with pride. "Dad," Maya whispered, stepping closer to Henry, her eyes pleading for help. "I don't know what to do. I want to try, but I'm scared that I'll disappoint you." Henry placed his large hand on her shoulder, rough but warm as always. "Maya, you could never disappoint me," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Yesterday, when you were on stage, I saw how strong you are. If Mr. Langston believes in you, then I believe in you too. Go on, sweetheart. Go to where your dreams belong." He smiled, tears streaming down his cheeks, but they were tears of joy. Maya turned back to look at Victor, her eyes no longer trembling but shining with a small flame. "Mr. Langston," she said, her voice soft yet clear, "I agree. I will try." Victor nodded, his smile widening. "Great, Maya. I'll arrange everything. In a week, you'll be on a plane to New York. Juilliard is waiting for you." He turned to Eleanor, his gaze sharp. "Miss Price, I hope Franklin School is proud to have a student like Maya." Eleanor nodded stiffly, her lips pressed tight, unable to say anything. As Victor left the classroom, the auditorium buzzed with whispers. Charlotte and her friends looked at Maya with a mix of envy and confusion, but she didn't care anymore. She embraced Henry, tears streaming down her face onto his shoulder, not out of fear but out of joy. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered. "I won't let you down." Henry gently patted her back, his voice steady. "I know, Maya. I've always known." Outside, the spring sunlight of Detroit streamed through the window, casting a warm golden hue over the old violin. Maya had no idea that the road to Juilliard would be fraught with challenges, that she would face trials greater than the taunts she endured at Franklin. But right now, with her father's love and the opportunity from Victor Langston, she felt as if she could soar not just 500 miles to New York, but all the way to the distant dreams she once thought were out of reach. A week after Victor Langston made his fateful proposal, Maya Jackson stood in front of Detroit Metro Airport, her worn shoes scraping against the cold tile floor, clutching her old violin wrapped in a frayed cloth. Henry Jackson stood beside her, his janitor uniform replaced by a tattered coat he had worn since Maya was little. He held her hand, his callous palm warm as always, his eyes shining with a mix of hope and worry. "You can do this, Maya," he said, his voice deep and comforting. "I believe in you." Maya nodded, tears silently streaming down her face, not out of fear but from the realization that she was about to leave behind the father who had sacrificed everything for her to have this day. As the plane took off, carrying her 500 miles from Detroit to New York, Maya gazed out the window, watching Henry's figure shrink away, but his love would never leave her side. But Maya's destination wasn't Juilliard right away. Victor Langston had arranged for her to begin her journey at the Langston Conservatory in Chicago, Illinois, a prestigious music school he founded to nurture young talent before they were ready for bigger stages. As Maya stepped out of O'Hare Airport, the crisp autumn chill of Chicago hit her face, carrying the scent of exhaust and the bustling noise of the city. Victor was waiting for her, a warm smile on his face, next to a sleek black car. "Welcome to Chicago, Maya," he said, opening the car door. "This is where you'll hone your talent." Maya got into the car, clutching her instrument, feeling as if she had just fallen into a completely foreign world. Langston Conservatory is located in the heart of Chicago, an old building with red brick walls and soaring windows. Inside, long marble hallways echo with the sounds of instruments from every corner. Maya was awarded a full scholarship, something Victor called an opportunity to prove she deserves it. But as she stepped into her first class, she realized that this opportunity wouldn't be easy. The large room was flooded with light from the tall windows, featuring a magnificent piano in the center, surrounded by other students, most of whom came from wealthy families, dressed in expensive uniforms and holding shiny violins worth thousands of dollars. Maya stood in the corner of the room, wearing Henry's old sweater, her worn-out shoes exposing her toes, and holding a patched-up violin with duct tape, feeling completely out of place. Immediately, she felt the stares. A blonde girl, with an air of arrogance, approached her, her cold blue eyes sweeping over Maya's guitar. "Are you Maya Jackson?" she asked, her voice sweet, but laced with sharp edges. "I heard you got a special pass from Mr. Langston to get in here. Let's see what you can do with that piece of junk." She scoffed. Turning to her giggling friends behind her, Maya recognized that tone. It was just like Charlotte Hayes back at Franklin, but sharper, more ruthless. This girl was Abigail Reynolds, daughter of a major donor to Langston Conservatory, who always bragged about her $5,000 violin. "Welcome to Langston," Abigail added, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "But don't expect any special treatment just because Mr. Langston feels sorry for you." Maya bowed her head, her heart pounding, feeling as if she had just returned to Franklin. But this time, the pressure was even greater. She wanted to argue back, to say that she didn't need anyone's pity, that she had stood on stage by herself and silenced the entire room. But she couldn't find the words. She simply sat quietly in the corner, clutching her guitar, trying to make herself smaller. And then the door swung open. A tall man with silver hair walked in, his demeanor serious. He wore a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, his sharp eyes scanning the classroom like an eagle. "I am Leonard Brooks," he said, his deep voice resonating with authority. "Your head professor here. Langston is not a place for games. Anyone who isn't up to the challenge will be cut immediately." Leonard Brooks is a legend in the music world, having trained a host of world-renowned violinists. But he's also infamous for his ruthless standards. When his gaze landed on Maya, he stepped forward, snatching the violin from her hands without asking. He inspected it, his fingers gliding over the cracks and tape, then let out a sigh. "This instrument is subpar," he said, his tone icy. "I know you're Mr. Langston's special student. But here, I don't care where you come from or who's backing you. If you want to stay, you need to prove yourself with talent, not a sob story." He handed the violin back, his eyes piercing through her. "Start now. Play a piece for me." The whole class turned to look at Maya, Abigail, and their group of friends giggling, waiting for her to fail. Maya stood up, her hands trembling as she lifted the violin to her shoulder. She closed her eyes, trying to recapture the feeling from a Franklin stage, where she had silenced the audience. But here, under Leonard's cold gaze and the quiet laughter of Abigail, everything felt heavier. She drew the bow. The first note came out hoarse and shaky, like the cry of a bird with a broken wing. Leonard crossed his arms, his expression unchanged. "Stop," he said after a few notes, his voice sharp as a knife. "Your technique is terrible. There's emotion, sure, but here, emotion isn't enough. You have 1 month to improve, or I'll recommend Mr. Langston send you back to Detroit." Maya lowered her guitar, tears welling up, but she swallowed them back. Abigail laughed loudly, her voice echoing in the room. "I told you, pity won't help you survive at Langston." The whole class laughed along, their laughter slicing through Maya's confidence like a knife. When the class ended, she sat alone in the room, holding her guitar, feeling as if all her dreams were shattering. She remembered Henry, the trust in his eyes, and his words that she would never be alone. But now, in Chicago, 300 miles from home, she felt smaller and more lost than ever. Outside, the vibrant sunset of Chicago streamed through the window, casting a warm glow on the old violin. Maya wiped her tears, stood up, and placed the instrument on her shoulder once more. "I won't give up," she whispered to herself, her voice soft but resolute. She began to play again, note by note, even though her hands still trembled and the sound remained rough. She knew the path at Langston Conservatory wouldn't be easy, that Abigail and Leonard wouldn't give her a moment's peace. But she also knew that somewhere in Detroit, Henry was waiting for her, believing in her, and for him, she would fight. The fiery red sunset of Chicago gradually faded, giving way to the darkness enveloping Langston Conservatory. In the now empty large rehearsal room, Maya Jackson sat alone, an old violin resting on her lap, her small hands trembling after the pressure of her first class. The mocking laughter of Abigail Reynolds and the cold warning from Leonard Brooks echoed in her mind, like hammers pounding on the fragile confidence that had just begun to spark after her performance at Franklin. She looked at the instrument, its cracks and faded pieces of tape, and wondered if she truly belonged here, or if it was all just a dream too big for her to reach. But then, in the heavy silence of the room, memories of Henry Jackson flooded back like a warm tide. She remembered her father's trusting gaze as she boarded the plane in Detroit, recalled his voice saying, "You're never alone, Maya." She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and stood up. "I can't give up," she whispered, her voice soft yet resolute. She slung the guitar over her shoulder, drew the bow across the strings, letting the rough notes resonate in the darkness. The sound wasn't perfect, but it was her voice, the voice she had used to silence the Franklin Auditorium, and now she would use it to fight at Langston. The following days at Langston Conservatory were a never-ending nightmare. Leonard Brooks showed no mercy. He assigned Maya complex technical exercises, pieces of music that demanded precision down to the last note, rhythms that even Abigail and her wealthy classmates struggled to master. Each time Maya played a wrong note, even just one, Leonard would stop her, his voice sharp as a knife. "Not good enough," he said, his cold gaze sweeping over her. "I've told you, there's not enough emotion here. If you don't improve your technique, you won't last more than a month." Abigail stood in the corner of the room, her plump red lips curling into a mocking smile. "I told you so," she whispered to her friends, loud enough for Maya to hear. "She doesn't belong here." The pressure weighed down on Maya like a 1,000-pound rock. She practiced late into the night in the studio, as the streetlights of Chicago streamed through the window, casting a soft yellow hue on the wooden floor. Her hands were bleeding from pulling the bow too much, fresh calluses rising on her bony fingers. Some nights, she curled up in her tiny dorm room, clutching her violin and crying. "Dad, I'm so tired," she whispered to the darkness, tears falling onto the frayed fabric of the cover. She missed Henry, missed the way he would sit and fix the violin under the dim light, missed his gentle smile when she stepped off the Franklin stage. But here, 300 miles from Detroit, she felt more alone than ever. Abigail doesn't make things easy. She's always finding ways to put Maya down, from mocking her in class to deliberately dropping her guitar during recess. "Oops, sorry about that," Abigail sneered as Maya's old guitar hit the floor, a string snapping with a loud twang. Her friends giggled along, their eyes filled with disdain. Maya bent down to pick up her guitar, her hands trembling, but she didn't say a word. She quietly took it back to her room, using tape from her suitcase to fix it, just like Henry used to do. "I don't need them to like me," she told herself, her voice choked. "I just need to prove I can do this." And then a small beam of light appeared in the darkness. During a group lesson, Leonard asked the class to play a duet with two students performing together to test their coordination. He pointed at Maya and Abigail. "You two, come up here," he said in a flat tone. Abigail smirked, stepping forward with her shiny violin, her eyes seeming to say, "You're just going to embarrass me." Maya stood up, clutching her old instrument, her heart pounding. As they began to play, Abigail took the lead with her skillful technique, her notes sharp as crystal. Maya struggled to keep up, but her old violin couldn't match the perfect sound of Abigail. A wrong note rang out, and Abigail stopped, turning to her with an angry glare. "What are you doing?" she shouted. "You're ruining everything." Leonard raised his hand, signaling both of them to stop. "Abigail, that's enough," he said, his tone cold. He turned to Maya, his gaze shifting from mere disdain to a hint of curiosity. "Jackson, you're slower than Abigail, but you have something she lacks, emotion. Technique can be learned, but the heart cannot." Abigail flushed, gripping her instrument tightly, her eyes flashing with jealousy. Leonard continued, "You two will play this piece again next week. I want to see progress from both of you." He turned away, leaving Maya standing there, both astonished and relieved. Leonard's words weren't a full-blown compliment, but for her, they felt like a small ray of hope amidst a storm. Can you feel the persistent fire in Maya's heart? Hit like and subscribe to the Legendary Narratives channel to join us as this girl conquers her dreams, note by note. Thank you. From that day on, Maya practiced with a new strength. She wasn't just playing to meet Leonard's demands. She was playing to prove that she wasn't a failure, that this old violin could sing just as beautifully as any expensive one. She stayed in the practice room until the clock struck 2 a.m., when the Langston Conservatory fell into silence. Her hands ached, her fingers were bleeding, but she didn't stop. Each note was a promise to Henry, to Victor Langston, and to herself. She remembered her father's words, "You are never alone, Maya." And in her darkest moments, she felt him there, quietly cheering her on from afar. One night, while Maya was practicing in the studio, the door creaked open. Leonard Brooks stepped in, but he didn't say a word. He stood in the corner, arms crossed, his sharp gaze observing her every move. Maya didn't realize he was there. She closed her eyes, letting the music guide her, the notes now flowing smoother, stronger, like a river breaking through the ice. When she finished and opened her eyes, she jumped in surprise to see Leonard standing there. He didn't smile, but his expression had changed, no longer cold, but filled with attention. "You've improved," he said, his voice deep, "but it's still not enough. Keep going." He turned away, leaving Maya standing there, her heart racing. His words weren't a grand compliment, but to her, it felt like a small victory, a step closer to proving herself at Langston. Outside, the streetlights of Chicago cast a warm golden glow through the window, illuminating the old violin in Maya's hands. She cradled the instrument, feeling as if she had just rediscovered a part of herself. She knew the road ahead would be long, that Abigail and Leonard would continue to challenge her. But she also understood that with Henry's love and her own perseverance, she could conquer each note one day at a time. Time at Langston Conservatory flew by like a strong wind, sweeping Maya Jackson into days filled with challenges and perseverance. The winter of 2024 blanketed Chicago in a thick layer of white snow, making the streets around the music school cold and slippery. But deep inside Maya, a small flame still burned, a flame ignited by the love of Henry Jackson and the rare acknowledgement from Leonard Brooks. After months of practicing to the point of exhaustion, with bloodied hands and silent tears in her dorm room, Maya gradually transformed her old violin into a weapon, not for attack, but to prove that she was not the failure Abigail Reynolds and her friends had once thought. Maya's biggest opportunity came on a frigid afternoon when Leonard Brooks walked into the classroom with a special announcement. "The annual concert of Langston Conservatory is happening in 2 weeks," he said, his deep voice resonating with authority as his sharp gaze swept over each student. "This isn't just a performance. It's where music critics, sponsors, and even big-name artists will come to watch. I've chosen Maya Jackson to play a solo." The class fell silent, then erupted into a flurry of whispers. Abigail shot up from her seat, her green eyes blazing with anger. "Mr. Brooks, why her?" she shouted, her voice trembling. "She doesn't deserve it. She doesn't even have the technique I do." Leonard looked at Abigail, his gaze as cold as ice. "Sit down, Reynolds," he said. "I chose Jackson because she has something you lack. Soul. Your technique is good, but it's emotionless. I want to see both of you compete fairly on stage." Maya stood in the corner of the room, her heart pounding, unable to believe her ears. A solo at Langston's concert, a chance that even the brightest students could only dream of, was now hers. But the joy was quickly snuffed out by Abigail's envious glare and the whispers of her friends. "Look at that, getting special treatment again," one of them said, loud enough for Maya to hear. "I bet Mr. Langston pressured Mr. Brooks to pick her." Maya lowered her head, clutching her guitar, feeling like she had just been lifted up only to be thrown into a deep pit in a matter of seconds. But she didn't have time to feel insecure. She only had 2 weeks to prepare, and she knew Leonard wouldn't forgive any mistakes. She threw herself into practice like never before. Every day, she stayed in the studio until the clock struck midnight, when the snow blanketed the windows and the streetlights of Chicago cast a soft yellow glow on her violin. She played Vivaldi's Winter, a piece full of emotion but demanding exceptional skill, which Leonard had chosen to challenge her. Her hands ached, her fingers bled from the intricate passages. But she didn't stop. She remembered Henry's words, "You are never alone, Maya." And each time she drew the bow across the strings, she imagined her father standing in the corner of the room, smiling with a look of unwavering faith. But the past wouldn't let her be. One afternoon, as Maya was walking to the main hallway of Langston on her way to the practice room, she stopped in front of the large bulletin board. A familiar name caught her eye. Robert Coleman, her former teacher from Franklin, who had once mocked her in front of Eleanor Price. He was invited as a guest of honor at the concert, recognized as a renowned music critic in Detroit. Maya's heart felt like it stopped. She recalled Coleman's cruel words from over a year ago. "You think you can play the violin with that piece of junk? Don't get your hopes up." That voice, that disdainful look, had made her doubt herself to the point of wanting to give up. And now, he would be sitting in the audience, watching her play. Maya ran back to her dorm, slammed the door shut, hugged her guitar, and sank down onto the floor. Tears fell onto the worn fabric beneath her, her breath coming in quick gasps as if she were about to suffocate. "I can't do this," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "He'll laugh at me again, just like before." Memories of Franklin flooded back. The laughter of Charlotte Hayes, Eleanor's cold gaze, and Coleman's voice felt like a knife stabbing into her dreams. She wanted to call Henry, to hear him say that everything would be okay, but she didn't dare. She was afraid he would worry, afraid he would think she was weak. She sat there for hours, cradling her guitar, until the phone rang. It was Victor Langston. "Maya, I heard you've been chosen to play solo," he said over the phone, his voice warm yet serious. "Leonard mentioned you've made incredible progress. Are you okay?" Maya hesitated, then burst into tears. "Mr. Langston, I'm so scared," she said, her voice trembling. "Robert Coleman will be there. He once told me I'd never amount to anything with this guitar. I don't want him to be right." Victor was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Maya, Coleman doesn't define who you are. You've come from Detroit to Chicago, from a corner of a music room to a big stage. Don't let the past hold you back. Play, and prove it to yourself, not to him." Victor's words were like a breeze cutting to the fog in Maya's heart. She wiped her tears, stood up, and slung the guitar over her shoulder. She played Winter again, note by note, even though her hands were still trembling and tears continued to fall. The raspy sound filled the small room, but it was stronger than ever, a declaration that she would not let Robert Coleman or anyone else define her worth. The night before the annual concert at Langston Conservatory, Maya Jackson stood in the practice room, the dim lights casting a glow on the old violin in her hands. Snow fell heavily outside the window, blanketing Chicago in a cold white layer, but inside Maya, a fire burned, not bright and flashy, but smoldering steadfast. After the call from Victor Langston, she had found her courage again, determined to make Vivaldi's Winter her own voice, not just to please Leonard Brooks, but confront Robert Coleman, the one who had turned her dreams into a joke back at Franklin. She closed her eyes, drew the bow across the strings, and let the first notes ring out, raspy yet powerful, like the winter wind blowing through southeast Detroit. On the day of the concert, Langston's grand hall sparkled with the glow of dazzling chandeliers, packed with hundreds of attendees, from music critics and sponsors to renowned artists, filling the plush red velvet seats. Maya stood backstage, clutching her guitar, her worn shoes scuffing against the glossy wooden floor. She wore an old sweater of Henry's, but Victor had draped a red shawl over her shoulders to add a touch of elegance. "Play like yourself, Maya," he said before stepping away, his eyes shining with belief. But as she peered through the curtain's gap, she spotted Robert Coleman sitting in the front row, his graying hair and sharp gaze as piercing as it had been back at Franklin. Her heart tightened, memories of his mocking words crashing over her like a wave. "Don't get lost in foolish dreams, little girl." Leonard Brooks stepped onto the stage, his voice booming through the microphone. "Next, we have Maya Jackson with Vivaldi's Winter," he announced, his gaze briefly flicking toward her like a final challenge. The audience clapped sporadically, but whispers began to rise. Abigail Reynolds, standing in the wings on the other side, smirked. "Look at her," she whispered to another student. "Just wait and see. She's going to make a fool of herself." Maya took a deep breath, stepping onto stage, the blinding lights shining directly on her face. She felt small under the spotlight, her patched-up violin looking pitiful against the opulence of Langston. But she didn't look down. She stared straight ahead, searching for a steadying point within herself. She placed the violin on her shoulder, closed her eyes, and began to draw the bow. The first note rang out, trembling and husky, like the cold wind slicing through the winter night. The audience was still murmuring, a few soft laughs drifting into her ears. Robert Coleman sat with his arms crossed, his gaze icy, as if waiting for her to fail. But Maya didn't stop. She thought of Henry, his callous hands fixing the violin, his eyes lighting up when she played it Franklin. "You're not alone," she whispered in her heart, and her hand began to move faster, more precisely. The notes flowed out smoothly, powerfully, like a winter storm sweeping away all doubt. The audience gradually fell silent. The sound from Maya's old violin was far from perfect. It wasn't as clear as Abigail's, nor as polished as the expensive instruments. Yet it carried a strange vitality, a soul that no one could deny. She played with all her heart, each note a response to the days she was mocked at Franklin, to the nights she cried at Langston, to the times Robert Coleman told her she wasn't worthy. As the music reached its climax, the sound erupted like a whirlwind, sweeping to the auditorium, shaking every heart that was listening. Abigail stood in the wings, her hands clenched tightly, her face pale with astonishment. As the final note rang out, long and deep, Maya opened her eyes. The auditorium fell into silence for a few seconds, then erupted into applause, not scattered but thunderous, like a massive wave. She looked down and saw Leonard Brooks standing up, clapping slowly, his gaze no longer cold but filled with acknowledgement. Victor Langston, seated in the middle row, wore a radiant smile, his eyes shimmering with tears. But Maya's gaze lingered on Robert Coleman. He sat there motionless, his face set, his eyes no longer filled with disdain, but mixed with astonishment and regret. He stood up, slowly clapping, then gave a slight nod, a small gesture, but to Maya, it felt like a silent apology. She lowered the guitar, tears streaming down her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. She stepped off the stage, her legs no longer trembling. Leonard approached, placing his hand on her shoulder. "Well done, Jackson," he said, his voice deep yet warm. "You've proven you belong here." Abigail turned away, saying nothing, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Maya didn't notice. She was only thinking of Henry, who was in Detroit, 300 miles away. She knew if he were here, he would hug her and say, "Dad always believed in you." The audience was still echoing with applause as Maya stood backstage, holding her guitar. She hadn't just defeated Robert Coleman or Abigail's prejudices. She had conquered herself, overcoming the scars of her past to stand strong at Langston. But she knew this wasn't the end. This concert was just a step, and the road ahead was still long. In the dim light, she smiled, feeling as if a part of Henry was right there with her, quietly cheering her on. After the victory at the Langston Conservatory's annual concert, the atmosphere in the auditorium still buzzed with a thunderous applause for Maya Jackson. Outside, the snow continued to fall heavily over Chicago, blanketing the streets around the school in a cold white layer. But inside Maya's heart, a warmth was spreading, not from the stage lights, but from the feeling that she had truly surpassed herself. She stood backstage, clutching her old, tape-covered violin, her small hands no longer trembling. The applause gradually faded, but the gaze of Leonard Brooks, the nod from Robert Coleman, and the smile from Victor Langston remained etched in her mind, like beacons lighting the path she had just traveled. That night, the auditorium gradually emptied, but Maya didn't rush to leave. She sat on a chair backstage, gazing at the guitar in her hands, her fingers gliding over the cracks that Henry Jackson had painstakingly repaired over 2 years ago. She remembered the struggling southeast Detroit, the run-down apartment where her father worked from dawn till dusk so she could stand here today. She recalled the trusting look in his eyes when she boarded the plane nearly 6 months ago, the way he said, "You can do it, Maya." And now, 300 miles from Detroit to Chicago wasn't just a distance. It was a journey where she had turned her dreams into reality. Victor Langston stepped forward, his dark blue suit still exuding an air of authority, but his gaze was softer than ever. "Maya," he said, sitting down beside her, "you've done what I knew you could since the day I heard you play at Franklin. Today isn't just a performance, it's a message." Maya looked up, her big round eyes shimmering with tears. "What message is that?" she asked, her voice small yet curious. Victor smiled, placing his hand on her shoulder. "That no one could define your worth. Not your circumstances, not your prejudices, not your past. You've proven that talent and perseverance can break through any barrier. Victor's words were like a warm breeze blowing through Maya's heart. She lowered her head, tears silently falling, but this time not out of fear or sadness, but out of happiness. Just as that joy was about to fully blossom, a familiar figure appeared at the backstage door. Robert Coleman stepped forward, his graying hair illuminated by the dim lights, his gaze no longer as sharp as it had been back in Franklin. He stopped in front of Maya, hands tucked into his coat pockets, his voice deep as he spoke. "Maya Jackson," he said, "I owe you an apology." Maya looked up, her heart racing, unable to believe her ears. Coleman continued, his eyes filled with regret. "I once thought you couldn't do anything with that instrument. I was wrong. Today, you didn't just play music. You taught me a lesson I will never forget." The auditorium was now eerily silent, but that moment felt like a tidal wave crashing inside Maya. She didn't say a word, just nodded gently, tears streaming down her face. Coleman turned away, but before he left, he paused and looked back at her. "You have a bright future ahead," he said, then stepped outside, leaving Maya with a sense of relief she had never experienced before. She hadn't just defeated him. She'd forgiven him, and that made her feel stronger than ever. Victor stood up, raising his hand to signal Maya to follow. "Come on, someone's waiting for you," he said, his eyes sparkling with joy. They stepped out of the main auditorium, where the lights were still blazing, and in the front row, Maya spotted Henry Jackson. He was wearing an old coat, his callous hands clasped together, and his eyes lit up when he saw her. "Dad!" Maya shouted, rushing towards him and wrapping her arms around him, tears streaming down her face uncontrollably. Henry held her tightly, his hand gently patting her back, just like he used to when she was little. "I took a 300-mile bus ride from Detroit to see you," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "You make me so proud, Maya. I knew you could do it." Maya rested her head on her father's shoulder, feeling as if all the pressure and pain from Franklin to Langston melted away in his embrace. Victor stepped forward, shaking Henry's hand, his voice warm and reassuring. "Mr. Jackson, you have an amazing daughter," he said, "and I have some great news. After today, Maya has been selected as a special candidate for an international performance program. Critics agree that her talent won't just stay in Chicago. It will resonate around the world." Henry looked at Maya, tears streaming down his cheeks, but his smile was brighter than ever. "Did you hear that, Maya?" he said. "I always knew you were a star." The auditorium erupted with applause from a few remaining people. Leonard Brooks, some students, and even Abigail Reynolds, who stood in the far corner. Her gaze was no longer filled with jealousy, but mixed with admiration. Abigail stepped forward, hesitating for a moment, then spoke softly. "You played really well, Jackson," she said, her voice awkward yet sincere. "I was wrong to underestimate you." Maya smiled and nodded slightly. "Thank you, Abigail," she replied, without a hint of resentment. She knew that today's victory wasn't about bringing anyone down, but about lifting everyone up, even those who had doubted her. Victor stepped onto the stage once more, microphone in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice resonating, "Maya Jackson is not just a talent. She is a living testament that dreams can overcome any barriers, from poverty and prejudice to doubt and skepticism. Her journey will inspire millions." The auditorium erupted in applause again, and Maya stood beside Henry, feeling as if she were soaring not just 300 miles from Detroit, but to a whole new horizon. As the stage lights dimmed, Maya held her guitar, looking at her father and Victor, her heart brimming with hope. She knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a greater journey, where she would use music to sow the seeds of perseverance, love, and change. Outside, Chicago remained cold, but within Maya, a spring was blossoming. She whispered to herself, "Thank you, Dad. Thank you, Mr. Langston. I won't stop." And under Henry's proud gaze, she knew she had risen above her fate, not just for herself, but for all those who had ever been doubted, ever been pushed aside. Thank you for joining us on the inspiring journey of Maya Jackson, from the streets of Detroit to the stage of the Langston Conservatory, where she overcame prejudice with an old violin and her father's love. If this story touched your heart, Please like and subscribe to Legendary Narratives so you won't miss the next inspiring tales. Maya has proven that dreams have no limits, and we hope you find that spark within yourself too. Leave a comment and share your feelings. We truly appreciate every word of encouragement. We'll see you again on more amazing journeys here at Legendary Narratives. Wishing you a day full of hope and strength.